Beyond the Bony Labyrinths. Podcast on music and philosophy by Lodewijk Muns. Episode 3. That Wild Waltz of von Weber's. It is seldom heard nowadays, but was once a great favourite and an ear-sore to others. The tune known as Weber's Last Waltz, or Weber's Last Musical Thought. By a series of coincidences, I came across this piece several times within a few weeks. Presumably because I was attuned to the tune, so to speak, the encounters multiplied. And it is those encounters and their unsuspected connections that make this tune fascinating. Not as a piece of music, but as a piece of cultural history. Because there is little good that one can say about the tune itself. It is well known nowadays that Weber's Last Waltz is not by Weber, and it is no dying thought. Nor is it truly a waltz. A Ländler might be the more fitting term. Ländler, the folksy archetype of the waltz, without a characteristic pagliappa that gives the waltz its swirling character. That is a waltz, and a waltz by Weber, Aufforderung zum Tanz, invitation to the dance. Since that other little work, that False Waltz, lacks comparable musical charm, we must attribute its erstwhile popularity to something else. That must have been primarily the suggestive effect of its spurious title, Weber's Last Musical Thought. In French, La Dernière Pensée Musicale de Weber. Weber died in London at 39. He was already terminally ill when he made the trip, in the final stages of tuberculosis. Out of concern for his family, he had nevertheless undertaken to conduct opera performances and concerts. What may have happened is that Weber happened to have with him there in London a little work by a younger colleague, Karl Gottlieb Reissiger, and that it was found among his papers. It must be due to the greed of the music market that Reissiger's dance was published shortly after Weber's death as his last musical gasp. In a similar way, supposedly last thoughts were marketed by Vincenzo Bellini, who also died young, and by Beethoven. We can also count Schubert's posthumous song collection Schwanengesang, a swan song, among this category of last thoughts. Erik Satie parodied his practice with his 1915 piano pieces Avant-dernière pensée, Penultimate thoughts. I will come back to that. These elaborations should have made you curious about that tune, which I have claimed lacks musical charm. Carl Gottlieb Reissiger, the composer of this dance attributed to Weber, was Weber's successor as conductor at the Dresden Opera. He has more than 200 opus numbers to his name, not counting 8 operas, and even has a fan site today. But surely his most famous piece is number 5 of his Danse Brillante, thanks to that false attribution to Weber. Reissiger later told his version of how it may have happened. In 1824 he stayed at Weber's house, and there he played his Danse Brillante, which by then had already appeared in print. Number 5 had pleased Weber so well that Reissiger had to repeat it several times. Weber also suggested, just for fun, words to sing at the middle section. Net waar, du bist mein Schatzel? Yes, right, you are my sweetheart. Net waar, du bist mein Schatzel. Reissiger thought that Weber might have played the piece himself in Paris on his way to London. There someone must have written it down by ear and then published it under that title, Dernière pensée, Last Thought. He modestly concludes, I never attached any value to this sweet little thing, and I believe that without Weber's authority this waltz would never have received so much attention. The first time I came across Weber's supposed last waltz was when I read about a poem by the once popular American writer Nora Perry, published in 1872, that waltz of von Weber's. It is the monologue of an old accountant who in his dreary office is suddenly reminded of his first and only love when a street organ plays the waltz they once danced together. It's a perfect example of DTPOT, the darling they're playing our tune phenomenon, the subject of the previous episode of this podcast, the reliving of a moment from the past when hearing music associated with it, but here without the presence of the darling. It is also typically a sentimental declamation piece, such as was often performed at the time, in the late 19th century, with musical accompaniment. I can give it a try, but then I will have to shorten the text. Gaily and gaily rang the gay music, the blithe merry music of harp and of horn, the mad merry music that set us a-dancing, till over the midnight came stealing the morn. And just as the dawn came stealing and stealing, the last of those wild Weber waltzes began. I can hear the soft notes now appealing and pleading, and I catch the faint sound of the sandalwood fan. What is it indeed in this dusty old alley that brings me that night or that morning in June? What is it indeed? I laugh to confess it, a hand organ grinding a creaking old tune. But somewhere or other I caught in the measure that waltz of von Weber's, and back it all came, that night or that morning, just there at the dawning, when I danced the last dance with my first and last flame. Another casual and reluctant listener to Reissiger's obstinate tune was the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. 30 years old, in May 1843, he visited Berlin for the second time. On the 10th of May, he notes in his diary that he feels in very bad shape, on the point of collapse. On the way, while spending the night in Stralsund, I almost went mad hearing above me a young girl playing the piano, among other pieces, Weber's Last Waltz. The last time I was in Berlin, it was the first piece I heard in the Tiergarten, played on a harp by a blind man. A musical déjà vu, or rather déjà oui. The incident has special significance for Kierkegaard because he is fascinated by the phenomenon of repetition. If time is irreversible and life is a continuous stream, if every moment is unique in everyone's subjective experience, is repetition actually possible? What does that mean, repetition? He writes a peculiar and rather cryptic little book about it, a mixture of philosophy and fiction, entitled Repetition, an Essay in Experimental Psychology. Experimental psychology, the trip to Berlin should be seen as an experiment, a personal, experiential experience, not a scientific one. That trip is disappointing. It proves impossible to duplicate the pleasant experiences of the previous visit. The conclusion: that repetition is impossible. Of course it is, if you think of repetition as a perfect duplication. If you attend the same theatre performance twice, or twice have a cup of coffee, there are many similarities, but the experience in all its facets is unique each time. Kierkegaard does not link this to music, but music, probably more than any other medium, exists by the grace of repetition. In part it has to do with the limitation of our memory, but mostly it is about creating a regular flow, an alternation of heavier and lighter, a movement back and forth. The tick-tock of the clock or the metronome, the papa of the waltz. Musical phrases are also often repeated, as in Reissiger's Waltz. The notes are then the same each time, but hearing them the second time is not equivalent to hearing them the first time. They occupy different phases of the musical flow. Around the time Kierkegaard had his Berlin déjà vu, the French poet Théodore de Banville wrote a poem titled La dernière pensée de Weber. Lovers of French art song will immediately recognize the first lines. Nuit d'étoiles, sous tes voiles, sous ta brise et tes parfums. It is a text of one of Debussy's earliest melody and the first to be published in 1882. Nobody seems to have noticed that the phrasing of Banville's poem closely matches that of Reissiger's opening bars, though not quite note by note. Nuit d'étoiles, sous tes voiles, sous ta brise et tes parfums. It matches, but at the same time the music kills the poem. It is hard to associate starry villas and defunct lovers with the waltz's bumpy bass and yada-dada melody. Debussy can hardly have failed to know the tune, and he no doubt consciously suppressed the title. His song is known as Nuit d'étoiles. He also chose to ignore the implied waltz rhythm. The poet Banville, on the other hand, must have been seduced by the legend of the dernière pensée, and ennobled the tune in his imagination with the whole aura of German Romanticism. And what are we to make of this description in a 1912 study of the poet? The three phrases of Weber's admirable Last Thought express, in turn, pain, despair, and resigned despondency. But despite the broken rhythm and the dissonances of the second phrase, there is a serene melancholy, a kind of majesty about the whole. The air is both sad and soothing, haunting like a cherished and cruel memory. Even with the best will in the world, it is impossible to find such a spectrum of emotions, cruel and cherished, in Reissiger's Little Dance. A recording by Jacqueline Bonneau from 1958 seems to make an attempt in this direction. Even Hector Berlioz, who met Reissiger during his concert tour of Germany in 1844, notes that he is hardly known in Paris except for that lovely and melancholic waltz published under the title Weber's Last Thought. Douce et mélancolique, that is a surprising characterization. Similarly impressed with the false aura of the dernière pensée was Edgar Allan Poe, who made Reissiger's tune a favorite of his morbid and hypersensitive Roderick Usher in The Fall of the House of Usher of 1839. The story is told as a memoir by Usher's friend, the witness to his downfall. I shall ever bear about me a memory of the many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the House of Usher. His long improvised dirges will ring forever in my ears. Among other things, I hold painfully in mind a certain singular perversion and amplification of the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber. Those contradictory characterizations of Reissiger's inane melody remain astonishing. Both alliterating W's, the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber, may have been the origin of Nora Perry's sentimental poem I recited earlier. Let me, in conclusion, and to put an end to that persistent earworm, play one of Satie's penultimate thoughts. A lightweight music, emphatically anti-sentimental, a Dadaistic parody of romantic clichés. All three pieces are provided with a text written above the notes, but you don't seem to be supposed to speak them during performance. But then again, it is of no use to the listener. Satie also gives absurd instructions for pianistic interpretation. Sing seriously, with both feet on the ground, without gloss. I will play number 2, Aubade, because it too is a kind of waltz. It is dedicated to Satie's colleague and friend Paul Dukas. A fiancé under his fiancée's balcony. Do not slumber, sleeping beauty. Listen to your lover's voice. He strums a rigodon. How much he loves you! He is a poet. Can you hear him? He chuckles, perhaps? No, he adores you, sweet beauty. He picks up his rigodon and a cold. Will you not love him? But surely he is a poet. An old poet. This was episode 3 of Beyond the Bony Labyrinth. Sources for music and text can be found in the show notes.